Broncos country, what is up? So, we have a playoff game this upcoming weekend, and before we talk about that, we have to talk about something else. If you remember the way the Sean Payton tenure began in Denver, it obviously began with him being hired in January. We traded our draft picks to get him, and then he spoke to the media and said that we were no longer going to support Russell Wilson's team being there. But 5 months later, he dropped probably the best sports press conference ever. You remember Allen Iverson saying, "Oh, we're talking about practice, man, practice," and then you remember Marshawn Lynch saying, "I'm just here so I don't get fined." You remember Richard Sherman saying, "Oh, when you come at me with a sorry guy like Crabtree, this is the result you're going to get." But this one did not happen with a camera in front of Sean Payton's face. This one happened, on USA Today by Garrett Bell, who I honestly had never even heard of until he dropped this. And I woke up. I remember I was living in Vegas at the time in the service industry, which obviously meant some late nights. And I woke up at noon that day to an absolute cluster, to put it mildly, of text messages on my phone because people were talking about, Sean Payton and, what had happened and what he said about the Jets. And everybody had something to say, whether it was good, whether it was bad. Everybody had an opinion on what had went down between Sean Payton. So here is why this is the best sports press conference ever, because for the Broncos, it sent a message that the Broncos were going to be a different team going forward. Obviously, the interview began with him saying that, he was going to be mad if the Broncos weren't a playoff team. So he did kind of miss on that idea. And the fact that this was before 2023, not this upcoming year. But he talked about Russell Wilson and how he still had it. So he was kind of wrong in that regard. But he sent a message that the Broncos were going to do things differently. And hey, he implemented his culture, and this is the result that we are now living with. But everything he said about the Jets and Nathaniel Hackett was 1,000% correct and validated. He talked about the Jets, and we'll get into a lot of this later, but Hackett is no longer calling plays for the New York Jets. He got stripped of that duty midseason. And honestly, he probably wouldn't be in the NFL anymore if he was not frat bros with Aaron Rodgers. But it is extremely rare for a head coach to name drop another dude, let alone his predecessor, one that he took over for, and called him, one of the worst coaches in NFL history. And it's even rarer for a head coach to call out the GM and the president that he still, to this day, works with George Payton and Damani Leach in the building. And Payton laughed all the way to the playoffs with the worst roster in the NFL and a quarterback who's drafted the sixth quarterback in the entire draft in 2024, who was drafted at the 12th overall spot. So there were no expectations for this Broncos team this year. They were expected to have 5.5 wins by Vegas. Vegas clearly missed there. And the Jets also favored to make the playoffs at over 9.5 wins. I remember that being minus 165, nowhere near the playoffs. So yeah. Now, I'm here to talk about this interview, and I'm going to talk about it in its entirety. And I took screenshots because the USA Today website is just absolutely horrible on computer. And since I was running ad block, I couldn't also find a condensed way to scroll. So I'm just going to take screenshots of my favorite parts of the article. So this was obviously the beginning of the article. He says that he's going to be pissed off this is not a playoff team. They had their chance last year, but ultimately they started off really, really bad. They started off 1-4, 1-5. I can't even remember what it was. And then they lost their way out of the playoffs in the back half of the season. But here's the deal. It doesn't happen where an NFL team or organization gets embarrassed, and that's what happened here. Part of it was their own fault relative to spending so much, expletive time trying to win the offseason. The PR, the pomp and circumstance, marching people around and all this stuff. And you know what? I agree. I 100% agree because I felt like the Broncos bought into the idea, too much into the idea that they were going to be a good team without wanting to put in the work on the field. And the reason I say that is because when the Broncos won the day against the Dallas Cowboys in their joint practice 2 years ago, they really, really leaned into that. And a lot of people were really, really, just gouging into that idea. The fact that the Broncos had, quote unquote, destroyed the Cowboys that day. And we didn't even see the Broncos starters in the 2022 preseason. So that shows that, they bought way, way, way too much into that idea. And he's just been proven 100% right time and time again. They spent so much time trying to win the offseason, the PR, the pomp and circumstance, marching people around and all this stuff. We're not doing any of that. This is where things get juicy because I remember I 100% agreed with him at the time. I was like, okay, this Jets team is on Hard Knocks, but Aaron Rodgers wasn't good at the end of 2022, so I don't understand why people expect him to, magically turn the Jets franchise around. He was a weird dude. He loved bringing the trash cans like Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb with him, even though he would always complain about how, he didn't have any help or anything like that. And then he would, bring all the trash cans with him to the New York Jets. Same with Nathaniel Hackett, and there's another guy I'm just completely forgetting about. But remember when they signed Dalvin Cook? I remember casuals absolutely loved that move. And I remember a bartender that I worked with at the time put $1,000 on the Jets to win the Super Bowl after that had happened. And listen, I think a lot of this was just due to the fact that people really, really bought into Aaron Rodgers on the Jets. It did not feel like Payton to Denver or Brady to Manning at all, or Brady to Tampa at all when, all that was going down. But you watch Hard Knocks, I can see it coming. Remember when Dan Snyder put that dream team together? I was at the Giants. I was like, how are we going to compete with them? Deion's there now, and that team won 8 games or whatever. So listen, you just got to put the work in. And then Leach had asked, Bell had asked, what had gone on in the Broncos facility and why the team performed so bad in 2022. And Payton said, there's so much dirt around that. There's 20 dirty hands for what was allowed, tolerated in the training rooms, the meeting rooms, the offense. I don't know Hackett. A lot of people had dirt on their hands, and it wasn't just Russell. He didn't just flip. He still has it. This BS that he hit a wall, they couldn't get a play in. They were 29th in the league in pre-snap penalties on both sides of the ball. So, yeah, they couldn't get a play in, and I think what he's referencing was in our 2022 home opener in a game where we ended up winning because the defense giving a complete mammoth effort. The offense, literally, the fans had to help the offense count down the play clock when they'd go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it was just funny that Sean Payton had kind of leaned into that idea. Now, this BS that he hit a wall, it wasn't just Russell. He didn't just flip. Once again, he wasn't 100% right with everything he said, but he was pretty darn close. But what was allowed in the training rooms, the meeting rooms, the offense, I don't know Hackett. So what Mark Schlereth had said in regards to this was, I remember after Sean Payton got hired, Mark Schlereth heard about this from a Broncos source, and he was absolutely sick of it too, because there were kids running around like the locker rooms, just random people running around the weight rooms, and then Sean Payton came in and said, "Are you kidding me?" Like, he had absolutely had enough, and Schlereth had talked about that on FS1 at that times, and I don't know the extent of what was allowed in the training rooms and all that, but I know that there is some validity to that. The offense, I don't know Hackett. He talks about how he didn't know like what was going on with him, and he doesn't know him personally, obviously, as he mentioned there. But somebody had asked, what was going on with Russell Wilson and why. The first thing Sean Payton said after his press conference was that Russell Wilson's team was not going to be allowed in the building. And then he said that that's not on him. That's not on him for asking for it. That's on the Broncos for giving it to him. That was the parents who allowed it. That's not an incrimination on him, but an incrimination on the head coach, the GM, and the president who all watched this happen. And I remember when I was reading this article, my mouth was absolutely wide open that he was willing to criticize his own people that he was going to be working alongside with in the building, and still does to this day. Like, Payton and Leach aren't going anywhere, so that part made me laugh uncontrollably when I read that for the first time a year and a half ago. That was a message, but they can only beat the expletive out of you so much. But everyone's got a little stink on their hands. It's not just Russell. It was a poor offensive line. It might have been one of the worst coaching jobs in the history of the NFL. That's how bad it was. And you know what? He's not wrong, because how many of other coaches actually go one and done? And 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, we lost 51-14 against the Baker Mayfield Rams. And then that's when everybody had said that, we had enough of Nathaniel Hackett. But, it was a poor offensive line, I remember, because we lost Bolles in week 5 that year. And I remember we were just getting, the offensive line just looked terrible. Reisner looked awful. There were some other guys. I think right tackle was also a revolving door that year. Cushenberry hadn't taken his 4th year step yet that he took last year when this article was posted. So this, it was a poor offensive line. Yeah, it was a very, very poor offensive line. I remember it was undisciplined. We'd always get flagged for penalties. We probably had if I had to guess during the Hackett era, probably anywhere from 10 to 12 penalties in a single game. So, average. So, yeah. And ultimately, it's just fun to look at this article again because it has aged so spectacularly. Sean Payton, he cooked a Michelin star meal with this podcast and interview and whatever you want to call it. So, I don't know what's going to happen on Sunday with the Broncos, but what I will say, Sean Payton was 100% right. What the Jets have done the past 2 years and what Nathaniel Hackett has done the past 2 years, he has been proven right and proven right again. And now the Jets are probably going to enter their third or fourth rebuild ever since, 8-9 years ago. So yeah, that's really hard to stomach for the New York Jets, especially because, a lot of people wanted to rip on Sean Payton. A lot of people wanted to say, oh, we don't like him because XYZ. And if you're a fan of the Vikings or Falcons, I understand why you don't like the dude on a personal level. But he's right. He was 100% right. And, he initially backtracked on these comments, but I know for a fact that he doesn't regret it. You already know that he's smiling thinking about this. So yeah, that does it for me. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.